All right, experiments. This unit is all just about experiments. We talked about, we have observational studies, we have census, and we have experiments. We're just going to talk about experiments. Experiments are subjecting a sample or a population, doesn't have to just be a sample, it could be a population, to a controlled treatment. This treatment is like your influence. And we said experiments all have. And the objects on which the treatment is imposed on are called the subjects. All right. We have 3 things that make a good experimental design: randomization, control, and replication. You don't have to write down the definitions because they should make sense to you. If you want a good experiment, make sure the experiment is randomized. What does randomized mean? That means the people who are in your experiment randomly get assigned your treatments. So they randomly get assigned to a certain medication, whereas the other ones get randomly assigned to a placebo drug. We must make sure that we are having a control, so we are comparing people who are receiving the treatment to people who are not, or who are receiving a placebo. And then we need to make sure that it's replicated easily, that we are doing the same thing for every single person and nothing bad happens. The key to randomization is to reduce effects by confounding variables, which could produce bias. Now, we should remember confounding variables. We talked about it last unit. Confounding variables are those variables that are kind of hidden in the background of your study that probably have affected your results in some way. I gave you an example in a previous class of a researcher who studied ice cream sales and drownings. He said that when ice cream sales go up, drownings go up. So he tries to tell everybody to stop eating ice cream. But we know the confounding variable in that situation is temperature. And that when it gets hotter, there are more ice cream sales, which means there also are more people swimming, which means there's more drownings. Not because of one causing the other. Now, we have 2 new variables that we need to talk about: the explanatory variable and the response variable. I'd probably list the explanatory variable first, the response variable second. So maybe write them down in the opposite order than what I have. The explanatory variables explain or cause a change in the response variable. These determine the treatments imposed on the subjects. The explanatory variable typically is what you are doing in your study. It is your independent variable. What you are doing is typically just what is your treatment that you are giving. That's your explanatory variable. So you're treating something in this certain way, and then the response variable is your outcome, your result. I like how they say outcome and results here. This is your dependent variable. This is what you are trying to show. Key way to remember this is you always respond secondly, so explanatory comes first, is what is being done. You respond to something, so that's second. Response is your outcomes. Here are a couple experiments. we could talk about the subjects and then the explanatory versus the response. I'm going to do the first one, you'll do the second one, you'll talk about it. So we say a teacher thinks that students' grades improve after an email home to parents. The teacher randomly selects 50 students and emails home and compares the results to 50 other random students who weren't emailed. Okay? The subjects are going to be students. The explanatory variable, or what is being done, is I'm going to email some of these students' parents. So this email is going to be the explanatory variable. Yeah, it's right there. Okay? Now the response variable is what the outcome I'm trying to show. Okay? What is, what did I say? I said, not what is being done. That's the explanatory response is what we are trying to show. Good, what we are trying to show. What am I trying to show? I'm trying to show that students' grades improve. So the response variable would be the students' grades. If I show that the email produced increase in students' grades for the 50 random students, and it's a much larger increase compared to the control group, which would be no email. So the no email is the control group. Then I have a good study. Okay? All right, second one. Ms. Brents wants to see if an 8-minute passing period would decrease tardies. For 2 weeks, students go on an adjusted schedule, and tardies are compared to a 2-week period of a 7-minute schedule. You guys, write down what you think is the explanatory variable. Write down what you think is the response variable. Write down the subjects. Write down the control group. Okay, talk about your answers with your neighbors. Yep.
Are you going to explain the control?
Sure. The control group is just a group that nothing's being done.
So like in 7 minutes.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Would the subject be the two?
Who are the subjects? What is this change being done to?
The student?
Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
Okay, who's got a volunteer for the subject? Ms. Jameson, who are the subjects? The students are the subjects. Good. Mr. Holtz, what's the explanatory variable? The 8-minute passing period. The changing of the passing period is what we are doing. Ms. German, what would then be the response variable? Exactly, the number of tardies. We are seeing if the 8-minute passing period is going to decrease the number of tardies. What is the control group, Ms. Leffler? Yeah, the 7-minute period where it's just a normal schedule, nothing's changed. We are just going to go off of that 7-minute schedule as the control. And we're going to compare the tardies on the control to the tardies on the 8-minute. Now, what do you guys think? What is your opinion? Would an 8-minute passing period decrease the amount of tardies? I don't think so. I don't think it's so either. I'd say no, completely. Because seniors are still going to show up late to first period, rolling in, hair all wet. Sorry, woke up late. Mr. Master, I had a student last year who was late every single first period. And it wasn't because of the 8-minute passing period, 7-minute passing period. Okay, here is another experiment. We could have multiple treatments. Okay, so more than two treatments. We're used to one or the other, like in those other examples. We could have combinations of treatments. This is a study that wants to show the durability of fabric under repeated washings. Okay, so we're going to take fabric. We are then going to give it one of 9 treatments, which combos a treatment of the different temperature of the water and the different type of detergent. All right. Well, explanatory response subjects should really be kind of the similar idea. It's just the subjects is the fabric, not people this time. The response variable, what I want to show is the durability of the fabric. The explanatory variables, instead of just like one thing, the 8-minute passing period, or what was the other example I gave? The can't think today. The email home. Instead of just one thing, instead I have 9 things. I have the combination of the temperature and the type of soap. Okay, so explanatory variables can be multiple things. Now we want to make sure our design of our experiments are completely randomized. Make sure the number of units in each group are about the same. We will compare the results of the response variable from the control group to the other group, the treatment group, or the multiple treatment groups, and we will see if we have significant data to show. Okay? But the key is to randomly assign the treatments, and we already talked about that. Randomization process is very important. We'll talk about ways to randomly do things. Now, here's another situation of experiment, and I will show you what it looks like to draw an experimental design. So this is an experimental design. So the experiment is weight training good for children? So is it better for them to lift heavy weights for a few repetitions or moderate weights for a larger number of times? You start by the amount of people that you have in the study. So I have 43 volunteers who I have in the study. I'm going to do a box for the people that I start with. Then I do not have to include this box when I'm creating a design, but what is being shown is I'm going to randomly assign them to 3 different groups. And then here are my groups, my treatment groups, which will measure my explanatory variables. And then we finish off by just measuring and comparing the results, which will give you your response variable. This is the experimental design kind of flow chart that we will have to create. Okay. So start with our subjects, then the separation of our subjects into our treatment groups with our explanatory variables, and then measuring our response variable from there. I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to get this down if you want to. Now, there are ways to randomly assign these three groups. The key way is to make sure it is randomly assigned. You don't want people to volunteer to go in any group. Volunteering is good just to get your subjects, but volunteering is bad when you are assigning your treatments. Instead, we need to randomly assign. Can we randomly assign? We can have all sorts of different randomized process methods. Maybe we have a bag of colored chips. Your volunteers pick a colored chip. That will determine what treatment they get, what group they go into. Maybe we will have them roll a die, depending on what they roll. That will depend on what treatment it'll go into. We will talk about how we can use a random number generator, a random number table to assign a treatment. Or you can flip a coin. All different ways to assign your volunteers to the treatment. The key thing is that it needs to be randomized so that you are reducing bias and reducing your confounding variables. Now, the question is, what if we didn't randomize? Let's suppose we took volunteers to participate in a study. Let's suppose we took senior class students. Ms. Brents wants to do a study. She thinks that all senior students, since they're stressed out in the first semester, because of all the college applications and getting their transcripts in and finishing with solid grades for the first semester, definitely, they said, you know what, seniors, I'm going to assign you to a PE class. You're all going to either take kickboxing or yoga. Okay, you guys choose which class you want to go to, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those results, I'm going to study them, and then next year every single student, every single senior is just going to take that one class that we decided will reduce the stress level of the students better than the other. Okay? Why could that be bad in terms of an experimental design? Yeah, we're not supposed to let them volunteer, because why could volunteering create bias, Mr. Englander? What do you think?
You really like yoga, then you choose a yoga class so that it represents everyone, how everyone loves you.
Right. Maybe you have people who are showing up and already have their inherent biases about what will reduce stress, and they say, well, I know yoga's got to reduce stress, so I'm going to go to the yoga class. But little do they know, maybe kickboxing is extremely good at reducing stress. They don't know. Maybe, and then this situation comes up with a different one, maybe a group of friends all go to the kickboxing class or all go to the yoga class, and their stress is reduced because they're with their friends. The confounding variable may be friendship. The confounding variable may be just, the public opinion about yoga and how it reduces stress. Who knows? Okay, so that's why we don't want volunteers choosing. Instead, we need to randomly assign. That's important. Okay, now, we talked about the controlled groups. Let's talk about situations of blindness. We can have a single blind experiment or a double blind experiment. We'll talk about, and we'll draw up an example of a double blind experiment. Control group, we've already kind of listed. That's the group that either is doing nothing, that's changed nothing, or they're receiving a placebo. Now, placebos are treatments. A placebo, however, if you're talking about drugs, could be a sugar pill compared to an actual painkiller that, apparently we are trying to study or something. Placebo could be, you give somebody decaf coffee and you say, how did this coffee help you stay awake? And you compare it to actual coffee. So those are the differences. Now, a single blind experiment, the subjects aren't going to know what they receive. This is a typical situation where the subjects don't know if they're getting the actual medication or just something that's fake. Now, a double blind is very common in medical studies, and that's when the subjects and the evaluators are going to not know who's getting what. And the only person who does know is the researcher. Let me kind of draw up an example of what a double-blind experiment will look like. So we start with a researcher, typically like a pharmaceutical company or something like that. What they will do is that they have like this drug that they want to study. And these researchers will work with a bunch of doctors. That's doc 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the researcher will know whether they give the doctor, all placebos or all the actual drug or a combination of both. But the doctors do not know what they received. So when they give out these, pills to their patients don't know, and the doctors don't know. That's double blind. This one is the first blind. These guys are the second blind. Now, why do they do that? Yeah, exactly. So they're evaluated equally. If you give a doctor and say, hey, doc, I'm going to give you half, this half that I'm giving you in this hand, these are your placebo drugs, and this half, this drug is what we think is going to cure this form of rare cancer. Okay. Well, if the doctor knows, the doctor would probably say, hey, I'm going to give these drugs to the people who really, really need it. And I'm going to give the placebos to people that maybe I think I don't need it. Or maybe the people that I give the real drugs that really want this drug to work, I'm going to give them extra attention and everything. The key is to get everybody on a level playing field for the doctors not to know who's getting what. And yeah, it's going to be controversial, but it's best if nobody knows what's getting what. But that's how people figure out whether drugs are actually effective or not, is you really have to analyze results without any undue influence on situations. So that's a double-blind experiment. Okay, it does not mean that both the doctor is blind and the patient is blind when they're doing surgery. Okay, that's not double-blind. This is talking about placebos, how you can test the effects of a placebo. What would you give the control group? You'd give them maybe the real thing or another placebo or nothing. So this is a fun thing. Placebos have been tested against each other to determine which is more effective. In one study, sham acupuncture was pitted against dummy pills for chronic arm pain. Okay, so this is just like somebody who's randomly kind of sticking pins in somebody's arm and saying, this is acupuncture, it's going to work. And maybe like they don't even stick pins in the person's arm. They have them knocked out or something. And other people are given dummy pills. The people who got the sham acupuncture, just all of a sudden they feel like their arm is completely better. They have nothing wrong with them anymore, and it works better than the pills, which is interesting. They also talked about side effects. 25% of the acupuncture patients and 31% of the fake pill patients reported experiencing side effects, even though they weren't given anything. That's the power of the placebo. Okay, so it's almost like if I give you what I say is an energy drink, like here, drink this energy drink. It's really, really powerful. Literally, even though it could be just flavored water, who knows? Your brain's going to maybe treat it like it actually is an energy drink. All of a sudden, your behavior might change. Okay, another thing about this guy is not laughing. He must be in the placebo group. I don't know why we put these in there. Okay, we already talked about designing a good experiment, reducing the confounding variables because of the random selection. Also, this is very important, a good experiment will show cause and effect. Now, we haven't talked about that yet, but now we are. Difference between experiments and observations is that experiments can cause or can show causation. Because I gave them this changed, it was only because of this. No other variables. And if we show statistically significant differences, so large that they would rarely occur by chance, in the response variable, then boom, we have that causation. Here's another experiment. Yes. Causation. Good experiments show cause and effect, which is what we call causation. That's what you need to know. Here's an example of an experiment. We have 240 volunteers from 3 large cities. We assign them either a nicotine patch or a placebo patch. They all attended counseling before, during, and after the procedure. It is a double blind, so that means the researcher gives it to the clinics. The clinics then randomly assign it to the smokers. We find that 46% of the nicotine patch group quit smoking, 20% of the group quit. Okay, so if we had a experimental design, what would be the first box over here on the left? Yep, the 240 people. How many boxes would we have in the middle? 1, 2, or 3, or 4? Just 2. What would be maybe the top box? Yep, the patch. And what would be the bottom box? Placebo. How many people would we want in both boxes? 120. We want them evenly split up. And then the last box would just be to look at the results if they quit smoking. That would be the response variable. Okay, so that's what my experiment design would look like for that one. Experimental units, that's another way of calling in the subjects. What would be the subjects, Ms. Pushman? The volunteers. What are the treatments, Mr. Riley? Placebo versus patches. Yeah, the patches. Ms. Rios, the explanatory variable is the type of patch, whether it's the placebo or the actual nicotine patch. What would be the response variable? Who quit smoking? Excellent. How was the randomization applied? Well, who knows? It could have. It was a double-blind experiment, so nobody knew. So that's probably how they could randomly assign. How is the control applied, Ms. Simpson? What is the control group in this situation? The placebo, exactly. The placebo patch would be the control group. How is the replication applied, do you think, Watt? Yeah, it's 120 people in each group, so it's, it's comparable. Experiment, definitely. Results of the experiment, Mr. Visser. Do you remember from last page? Let's see. The results were 46% of the nicotine patch group quit smoking, 20% of the placebo group quit. What do you think? Did it work? Yeah, I would say yeah, the patch worked. 46%. Yeah, is it 100%? No, but is it better than nothing? Yes. So we say it's definitely better than nothing. All right. That's another example. We'll talk about that. We can assign, using a random number generated list, treatments by using odds and evens. Okay, this is kind of what I wanted to get to. We're talking about like a baby food experiment, and we have 30 babies. We want to make sure 15 are going to get food A and 15 are going to get food B. And this is our random number generator. To assign treatments is as simple as, is your number odd or even? So you go to your list. You see your first number is 1. You say, okay, every odd is going to get food A. So I say, okay, baby number 1, your number is 1, that's odd, you're going to get food A. Baby number 2, your number is 5. You are also odd, you are going to get food A. Baby number 3, your number is a 4, that's an even number, you are going to get food B. Baby number 4, your number is 5, so you're going to get food A because it's an odd. And that's how we can randomly assign treatments based off of a random number table. Okay, does anybody have any questions about that? This is baby number 10. What food would they get? Ms. Burke, what food do they get?
I don't know.
So that's why I asked the question. 0, is 0 odd or even? 0 is even, actually. If you can divide something by 2, it's even. So 0 divided by 2 is 0. Divides evenly. So 0 is an even number. Which food does baby 10 get? B. Even, baby gets food B. Okay, so you guys try. Experimenter wants to test the effectiveness of an all-day energy drink. They have 30 people who volunteer to be part of it. Let's just make it 10. Just so we don't do this forever. Half will receive the energy drink daily and half will receive the placebo daily. Assign the group to both groups. Okay, so assign the treatment to both groups. Okay, now the key to this assignment is that if we have half of the babies get one food, the rest are going to get the other. So once they got to, one food all filled up with 15, then they just assign the other ones the other one. So what you will do is you will do that with, where's my finger? You will do that with this situation and that. I want you to give the energy drink, the actual drink, to the odd numbers and the placebo to the even numbers. Tell me which people received which treatment. I'll start you off. Person number 1. Oh, thing broke. Person number 1 is assigned the random number 3. That is a odd random number. Therefore, they will receive the energy drink. And we go from there. Person number 2 receives the random number of 4. They receive the next one. And go all the way until you have 10 people assigned. Actually, it worked out nicely. Okay. However, after we get this 8 right here, and we had 5 total, we should have automatically filled out that 9 and 10 up here. Even though this number is 1 and 9, and that makes sense, if this number up here was, 2 and 4, we'd still give 9 and 10 the odd, because we want to make sure our groups are even to produce a good result. Okay, does everybody make sense on how we can use this random table now? Just odds and evens for 2 treatment groups. Now we could do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9 if we're talking about 3 groups. Okay, all of a sudden now I can do that. I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then skip the zeros and the 9s, something like that if you have 4 groups. So a bunch of different ways to randomly assign things if you have random groups. Finally, ethical guidelines in a study. The Institutional Review Board reviews every single study. If you want to do an experiment that you want to write a paper about and tell the world, you need to go through this Institutional Review Board. That way, we know that the experiment is safe and ethical. What does it mean to be ethical with your experiment? Well, there's stuff that you need to make sure you do. You must receive informed consent. This title is important. Informed consent means you must tell the people in your experiment what you are studying, the risk of possible harm, the questions that you're going to be asking, and how long it will take. If you do not do that, your experiment will probably not be valid. Okay, sometimes it's difficult to get informed consent depending on what kind of studies we're getting, but don't worry about that. People who can't speak for themselves, like infants or other populations, may be difficult. We want to make sure that all of our experiments, the results are confidential, at least, which means individual data is not released, only statistical summaries. It doesn't have to be confidential while you're doing the experiment. Like I can know the person's names of who I'm applying these treatments to. It's just whenever I want to talk to others about it, whenever I want to produce the data, I'm not going to use names. If you are in a study, your data, your name is safe. Now, confidentiality is required. However, anonymity also could be used, but it's not the same as confidentiality. Here, the names are not known to even the director of the study. All studies must have confidentiality. Not all need or could have anonymity. Now, we've done some experiments, and it's good to see these experiments as examples. Here was one of the experiments that we did, and this is the data from this class. The C here, memorization data. Okay? So I gave you the task. You guys tried to remember as many pairs of numbers as you could by looking at them, and you tried to remember as many pairs of numbers as you could by listening to them, and then you put your results up. Okay? Was this study confidential or was it anonymous? It's anonymous. Why? Because I put you as student 876543321, and you guys just entered it in yourselves, and I didn't know who's entering what where. So that way when we put the data up on the screen, we can't like see, oh, look at you, Miss May. You're really good at memorizing things by looking at it, but not good when you're hearing it. I don't know if that's you. I don't know who it is. So this is anonymous. I didn't know who produced what data. You guys didn't know who produced what data. Nobody knew. It was just everybody was tied to a number. And like if I asked you what number you was, you could tell me, but you didn't have to tell me. Okay? So that's anonymity. Nobody knew anything. If instead I put your names here in students, and then all of a sudden we have names associated, well, right now this is not anonymous, and what would make this confidential is if when I'm talking about the data to somebody else, I would just hide that. And then all of a sudden, you know, it wasn't a anonymous experiment, but I'm maintaining confidentiality by not showing names. You know, so understand the difference? That's anonymous. This, hidden, confidential. Okay? Okay, let's watch a video about a cool experiment that is done, and we'll also watch a video about the placebo effect. Oh, wow.